Welcome to week 9. What I'd like to do this week is make 2 videos, approximately 10 minutes each. First one dealing with 70s rock and roll, and the second one dealing with the movies, specifically the Stanley Kubrick movies 2001: A Space Odyssey and A Clockwork Orange. So first of all, let's talk about music. So as we move into the 70s, rock and roll really splinters apart, and many styles are become prevalent. And so what are some of these styles? First, we have what some people refer to as big dumb rock, FM radio, arena rock. Ted Nugent, a Detroit boy. I wish I would have seen Ted Nugent back in the day. He had a band called the Amboy Dukes back in Detroit. I'm from Detroit. Aerosmith, Boston, Foreigner, Bachman Turner Overdrive, Bad Company, Steve Miller, Styx, Peter Frampton. I'd like to talk a little more about Peter Frampton in a minute. Electric Light Orchestra, Heart, Fleetwood Mac, Moody Blues. We'll be talking about Fleetwood Mac again in a little bit. Steve Miller, Steve Miller. Very middle of the road stuff, very middle of the road, but the ability to sell millions of records and to sell out stadiums. And then the English bands, the English kind of heavier blues-based bands, had a real resurgence at this time. Cream, Deep Purple, Led Zeppelin, Judas Priest, Black Sabbath. Of course, Led Zeppelin, Judas Priest, and Black Sabbath really starting off the heavy metal trend, although Led Zeppelin was very folky at times. Again, that heavy metal trend, which is still very popular today. And also we had the country / southern rock stuff. Important for the quiz, pay attention. Such bands as the Eagles. Again, we'll be talking about the Eagles a little more in a bit. The Allman Brothers with the great Greg and Duane Allman. Duane Allman, fantastic guitar player at a very young age, played on some of the early soul music, played on some Aretha Franklin records, but then died tragically. Great guitar player, Duane Allman. Eagles, Allman Brothers, Leonard Skinner, Marshall Tucker, Charlie Daniels Band. I actually played with Charlie Daniels one time. Linda Ronstadt. This is the country southern rock vein. And then also progressive rock, Emerson, Lake and Palmer, Yes, King Crimson, Frank Zappa, Gentle Giant, Jethro Tull. I was a big fan of the progressive rock. I've got a few right here. We've got Jethro Tull's very influential record. Let me see if I can get it right on the screen here. I'm trying to do 2 things at one time. Aqualung by Jethro Tull, Aqualung. Jethro Tull was the name of the band. The main person in Jethro Tull, Ian Anderson, always has been, always will be. Ian Anderson is basically Jethro Tull. But a fine songwriter, Ian Anderson, a fine songwriter, a rather eccentric Englishman, but a fine band and a very, very good live band. I did get to see Jethro Tull live a number of times. But probably the most important of the progressive rock bands was Yes, another English band. Here's a copy of their album Fragile, which contained the big hit Roundabout. These are still in fine condition too, from the 70s. Yes, in Roundabout. Gentle Giant. You might not have heard of Gentle Giant, but they were an excellent band. Again, these bands played more complicated rock with classical elements. Not to confuse classical elements with classic rock, 2 different things. Classic rock, we usually think of it as Heart, Boston, Jimi Hendrix, but this music has classical elements. Some of the musicians were classically trained, specifically Keith Emerson of Emerson, Lake and Palmer, or Rick Wakeman of Yes. But anyway, a progressive rock and roll music right there. But I'd like to talk a little bit about this book that I'm holding in my left hand, Mansion on the Hill. Mansion on the Hill. Dylan, Young, Geffen, Springsteen, and the Head-On Collision of Rock and Commerce. That's Neil Young, of course. Mansion on the Hill by Fred Goodman. Fred Goodman. A fine book if you're interested in 70s rock and how music exploded in the 70s commercially. And this book goes on to talk about those people, especially Bruce Springsteen. Bruce Springsteen was especially important in the 70s because he had the first platinum album. Now we can have a gold album, which is 500,000 units, refers to how many units the album has sold. But then they had to come up with a new term in the 70s because an album sold 1 million units, something that had never happened before. A record album sold 1 million copies, and so they called this a platinum album. And the album was Born to Run by Bruce Springsteen. Born to Run, Bruce Springsteen, the first platinum album, the first album to sell 1 million copies. 1975, so that was a real milestone in the marketing of rock music. Before this time, rock music was a fairly small business and the bands were a little more free to do whatever they wanted. But now by the mid-70s, it's becoming big. Corporate rock has taken over. So 1975, Born to Run, the first million-selling album. But by 77 or 78, we had 10 million unit-selling albums, such as Frampton Comes Alive, Hotel California by the Eagles, Fleetwood Mac Rumors, the Rumors album by Fleetwood Mac with Lindsey Buckingham and Stevie Nicks. And also, no, I guess that's it. Born to Run, first million selling. Then we had Frampton Comes Alive, Hotel California, and Rumors. But this is a very fine book and really goes into many stories of the rock musicians and how this extreme commercialization of music in the mid-70s really destroyed the musician and frequently destroyed the music also. I'd like to read just a little bit about Peter Frampton, about his huge selling album Frampton Comes Alive, which was the largest selling live album of all time for many years. Upon its release in January of 1976, the two-record Frampton Comes Alive was a hit. In Detroit, where Frampton was slated to begin a tour with a one-nighter at Cobo Hall, 4 more shows had to be added. By April 10th, the album reached #1 on the Billboard chart, where it stayed for 10 weeks, eventually selling over 12 million copies. Radio embraced several pop singles from the album, including Show Me the Way and Baby I Love Your Way. The industry as a whole was enjoying a healthy period, but the years of constant touring provided Frampton with a following and produced the explosive sales. It didn't go from nothing to $100,000 a night. There were times we'd ask Peter to do a show for $200. Like Springsteen, Frampton was almost rueful about dealing with money. I didn't realize how much there was, he said after People magazine estimated that his album and tour had generated $50 million. I didn't want to know. It's a staggering amount. The recent crash of Humble Pie, Frampton was the guitarist for Humble Pie before he went on a solo career. The recent crash of Humble Pie should serve as a cautionary tale, but having worked hard for success, Frampton proved remarkably unprepared for it. From the first days of the tour in Detroit, where Peter played to 5 times as many fans as originally anticipated, the only philosophy driving the juggernaut was the rule of success: don't forget to get the money. Rather than practicing restraint, Frampton was frequently performing 7 nights a week, and virtually all publicity opportunities were accepted indiscriminately. He appeared twice on The Mike Douglas Show, an afternoon television talk and variety program that catered to housewives. After posing shirtless for the covers of Rolling Stone and People magazine, Frampton was shocked to find himself devoid of any critical currency and spurned by the fans who had initially embraced him. He was right back where he'd started 8 years earlier. He wasn't a musician, he was merely a teen heartthrob. Great book, many great stories, a whole chapter on the MC5, a hard to find book, but you can find it used on eBay. So, Mansion on a Hill. So we've got rock splintering into many different styles. We've got classic radio rock, typified by Nugent, Bachman Turner Overdrive, Boston, Steve Miller, the Fleetwood Mac. We've got Bruce Springsteen. We've got progressive rock that I talked about with Emerson, Lake and Palmer. Yes, King Crimson. Forgot to talk about King Crimson. And also Genesis, that spawned the careers of both Peter Gabriel and Phil Collins, their original drummer. Both came from Genesis. So progressive rock. And then the blues-based proto-metal bands, Cream, Black Sabbath, Deep Purple, and later on in the 70s, Judas Priest. So we've got rock really splintering apart, but really becoming huge, a huge business, and records now regularly selling over 1 million and up to 10 million copies. Fleetwood Mac's Rumors, Eagles, Hotel California, Bruce Springsteen, Born to Run, the first one at 1 million, and also Frampton Comes Alive, the double album with the very cute Frampton on the cover and his black Les Paul guitar that he still owns today, and that one being the largest selling live album of all time for many years. And research that for me and find out if it is still the largest selling live album of all time, and get back to me on that. So this is part 1 for week 9 on music and rock and roll. Please stay tuned for part 2, week 9 part 2, where we'll discuss movies and Stanley Kubrick and Clockwork Orange, 2001: A Space Odyssey, and a little bit about The Shining and the musician Walter Carlos, who had the best-selling classical album of all time for many years. So that's all for now. Check in with part 2.